So that's me building a web app that uses a backend to search an AI database and generate search results. What younger me doesn't realize is that one day I will want to use Docker to manage my front-end app and my back-end app while I'm developing. This way I can make changes in either the front end or the back end, and my containerized app will automatically pick up the changes and hot reload, just like this. I'm gonna show you how to do this and another command that saved me a ton of time and maybe even saved me some of the remaining hair that I have left on top of my head. This is an app I built to track bugs and issues. I've been using this in my courses for a few years now. Now what is new here is I've just plugged this up to a vector database. I'm using Weaviate here that uses machine learning to generate search results, which is pretty cool. During my development, I struggled a bit because I have a React front-end app that talks to a Node back-end app. And while I'm developing, I find myself in an evil cold loop of development. A tedious cycle in software development where code changes necessitate a full application restart, disrupting workflow and wasting time. I have to constantly go through the cycle of
making changes, restarting the app, adding something, restarting the app, debugging, restarting the app.
This makes me feel really sad. Up until now, whenever I wanted to Dockerize an app, I've manually created a Docker file. But let's be honest, usually I just copy someone else's Docker file or one of my old ones to save time. That's probably what you do too, right? Maybe? I was chatting with my buddy Chris recently about improving my Docker setup, and he said, "Why aren't you using Docker init?" Docker init?
Docker has recently made it a lot easier for you to be able to get going. If you execute Docker init in a folder space, it'll create the Docker file for you along with a compose YAML, and it gets you off to the races a lot sooner and faster with template/boilerplate code already written for you.
Docker init simplified setup and incorporates best practices without having to dive into docs or seek out similar projects on GitHub. Guilty. It also writes all the config to a completely editable Docker file like we're used to, and this came in handy because the initial scaffold of my Node and Express project needed some modification. As Chris and I discovered, the scaffolded Docker file was for production and we needed it to be for development. The key here was removing the production flag and building with the omit dev flag omitted. Remove the omit dev flag. Once we did that in both apps, everything worked beautifully.
Docker init does give you a nice way to discover more of what you can do and a place to start looking at things if you're unfamiliar with Docker and want to start getting into it. So that's you really get going with Docker a lot faster.
Now, oftentimes I find myself working with a bunch of different technologies like ASP.NET, Node, React, Angular, iOS and Android on the mobile side, and keeping track of Docker configurations for all these projects requires a certain level of organization that I kind of feel I lack. It's a bit like looking under my desk. I plug the stuff in, the stuff works, and usually I don't go back to make tweaks. After all, I'm no DevOps engineer. I'm just dev. One of my ancestors must have had their ops chopped off, only leaving the dev part, and that's what I inherited. While messing around with Docker init, I noticed that you can also scaffold out Docker configs for Go, Python, Node, Rust, ASP.NET, and the utility even automatically detects the type of project that you're in if it's one of those.
And that's what Docker init does for you.
But we weren't done yet.
Let's go back to the Docker Compose and kill that process and run it again. We've made this change to say dashboard 1. Let's run the command again to build it. You can see like this is kind of a painful process to restart the development server, right?
Super painful, yeah.
Evil cold loop.
I know for a fact.
Yeah, there it is. There's a change.
Hooray, but that's not feasible in the development scenario. We're all used to being able to just hit save and have the content change.
The biggest savings in the development cycle and what saved me from the evil cold loop was Docker Compose Watch.
Let's try to use Docker Compose Watch to watch for changes that are copied into the container such that we can trigger a sync change, which will help in this hot reload situation.
Watch has been a game changer for me, and here's why. Normally, when developing front-end web apps using a JavaScript-based framework, modern tooling implements some kind of a hot reload. Most of the time, you can do the same thing for a back-end Node app using some kind of a refreshing server that runs locally, but when you containerize the separate separate apps like I did and want both apps to start up with Docker Compose, which orchestrates the entire application, backend and front end, you lose the ability to continue hot reload development, at least by default. And the workflow usually devolves to having to run Docker Compose up and then subsequently Docker Compose down over and over again as changes are made.
See if I could just totally wing this one without looking at any documentation.
The watch command lets you keep an eye on your containerized applications, restarting services when the file changes are detected. Depending on the settings you configure, watch can automatically rebuild your image whenever specified files change, or it can also just sync changes made to static files from the host to the container in real time. You can specify which files trigger rebuild and which ones just sync, offering fine-grained control over the development workflow. This saves you from manually triggering builds like I was doing.
I love it. It's great.
Thanks to Docker for sponsoring this video and for providing free swag to you with free shipping anywhere in the world. Read the description down below for Raffle Rules. And thanks for watching. I will see you next time.
It enables a lot, I can tell you for sure. I'm already thinking about going back to work and being able to spin up simple dev containers so that no one even has to have Node installed on their computer. They will if they want to, run VS Code and all those other things or IDEs or whatnot, but to be able to run the dev environment completely on their computer, including hot reload, that's pretty slick that you can do that.